Hi, Martin.
Oh, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
And where are you?
I'm sitting in the garden office.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's already super hot. I have the feeling that we skipped spring this year. It went from really cold and windy and rainy and ugly to 30 degrees.
Yeah, in just a matter of days. So, not sure how long this will last.
Probably a matter of days until it's
Yeah.
rainy again.
Oh no, it's good weather now. It can stay for a couple of days.
Yeah, it will. It will. It will. But only.
Awesome. Who's joining?
Camille was on there before me.
Yeah.
We had a race.
Yeah.
I submitted my pull request and then I checked pull requests and Camille's pull request and my pull request both had the timestamp now. So it depended on which runner is faster, had
Mm,
to resolve the merge
you
conflict.
just made it.
I just made it.
Yeah. And graphical conf schedule is out. Everybody's seen.
Is the schedule
Yep.
already out?
Yes, but there is like in the past, you always have cancellations. So this will not be the final. There probably will be a couple of talks that will be either moved around or swapped out. We have a couple of on the wait list because in the past years there were like people that filed but then that don't have time or whatever.
Yeah, and we have to prepare the emergency talks as well in case someone gets a headache, to the conference when they actually have talks on the panel, you know.
Now it was the worst, but now I'm so vaccinated. I last US trip at GraphQL Summit, I did the full program. I'm now against COVID, against everything.
They were like patient zero. And then the
Yes.
entire guild just
Was I patient zero? I
I don't
must
know.
have gotten it the night before when we went out to this bar. I don't know what it was. Whatever.
I just remember us flying back. That was horrible.
Yeah. Lauren actually postponed the flight by one day.
Michael should have done the same. I was just getting sick when I was getting on the plane, so it wasn't so bad for me. But I was knocked out 3 days after the conf.
Yeah. Okay, are we complete? Let me check. Okay.
So it's here as well.
Derek is there. Is Shane coming?
He's just not allowed to talk until it's in the agenda.
Apologies for the late PR. I wasn't sure if I'm gonna make back from the.
Don't worry.
You don't have a. Yeah, I'll leave it up to you, Michael.
Okay. Let's get started. Before we get started, let me remind you that we all, by attending here, we all agree to the GraphQL Spec membership agreement, the participation guideline, the code of conduct, and the contribution guide. All of these agreements are linked in the agenda if you need a refresher. And with that, let's start with a quick round of introduction. My name is Michael, and I'm the host today.
Hi, I'm Pascal from Chili Cream.
Comes from the guild.
Martin from Apollo.
Jen from Apollo.
Derek from Apollo. My PR
Awesome.
is about to get merged soon, so sorry about it.
Let's refresh. Not there.
Not yet.
Okay, so we have 3 topics on the agenda for today. One is that we discuss if we want to get the spec in a certain state for GraphQL Conf, that we have some more updates there. The GraphQL core specification is doing a spec cut in June this month, maybe at the end of June.
July,
I have to,
yeah.
July. Right, we moved it a bit. There were more ambitious targets, but hopefully there are a couple of things that we get into the core spec before we have to wait another 2 years.
Emojis.
No. I was more thinking about the feature inspection.
But I think we're extending the from ASCII to Unicode, right? The character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the headline. Emojis.
Wasn't that not yet released? Is that still in this spec cut?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that's. I mean, we have this forever now, right?
Yeah. I mean, you don't implement typically implement these things when they are merged, and this was already merged into the draft spec. Yeah. So we have to think about what our targets are there. Not saying that we will have version 1, but maybe we get into an RFC 2, but let's have a look at that. Then we have the feature inspection as a topic here. I want to get a bit the sentiment in the group here, so we can also report back to Benji, so they get a better feeling if that is something we really want to merge. I think yes, but let's see. And then I just want to recap the decision we want to do on batch lookups with requirements. If we want to do that, it's not a big change, but we should be in agreement if that is a decision we want to do. Are there other topics? Not? Then Pascal, take it away.
Yeah, so the idea here is that we just have to agree on what where we want to be at GraphQL because we will have most likely a panel where we talk about this stuff. There is the state of composite schema or distributed GraphQL talk that will be there, and it would just be good that
I think we actually referred to it as Federation in that title there.
It's GraphQL Federation.
or Federation. I mean, if you have to draw people, guys, then revert back to the old patterns.
I thought it
Yeah,
was,
I mean,
they're
last conference
basically-
we were not. Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think basically as far as I know, the only concern with the GraphQL Federation was that basically if we have an RFC 0 or something that is actually ready for all reviews, that's when we can actually take the vote on the board to agree that this is a GraphQL Federation. That was the only holdup for it to actually call this GraphQL Federation. Other than that, I think we're all on board on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were in this group. We were aligned on calling it GraphQL Federation, and I went ahead for the talk that I'm doing with Martin to call it the State of Federation.
Awesome.
Yeah, so anyway, independent of what we call the thing that we work on since 2 years, we
that
have
long.
it feels way longer than this. We have to agree on where we want to be and how do we get there. And it's also a bit like we have to think about what's open, what do we have to do, and I think we should just start with which stage we want to have this back in. At the moment, we are in stage. Does this stage even exist, Michael? Is this stage 0? Or is this...
We are stage 0, which is like a straw man officially named, or it's not even the proposed stage, just so we set the right signals. until we have an agreement of the functionality. So the overview is, I looked the stages up. ChatGPT is so good. Yeah, it was more about the capabilities it has to have. And draft is accepted in principle. And like this means that there is no major thing that changes, but that doesn't mean that the spec text itself is final, so it could be rewritten. As for instance, with one-off we had that. It was a draft for a couple of while, but there was still spec changes. I think we are not yet in the draft stage. Like what we have is not there yet, right? But it could be an aim of us to say, okay, we go ahead and this is what we want to reach until the conference. If we don't reach it, it does not matter. But could be a goal.
Seems like a good goal to shoot for, especially because it's an opportunity to get more input from people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when we're in stage 2, we have to very quickly move to stage 3 and to finish. Otherwise, people will have opinions. We change stuff.
Well,
The goal is to move from stage 2 to 3 during the conference.
Yeah.
Over beers.
Yeah, and we only let Lee leave once the pull request is merged to main.
Yeah, I mean, there will be a lot of tutorial things anyway after that. But like this would be a good goal to shoot for. The same goes for the batching stuff. I spent this is HTTP protocol, not the batching stuff we talked about. I did invest the whole day today to write up the spec and shoot ideas between me and Benji. I hope I get something published this week. And that hopefully is also getting into some kind of draft form so that we can say, okay, this is the core spec that we have. And this is the transport the transport capabilities we expect, kind of. And then we are in a good state on this.
Yeah. Any like changes as a result of the conversations with Benji, or like rethinking while you were writing it?
Yeah, so what we looked at is a bit how these mechanisms, like today we looked a lot into the mechanisms like keep alive messages and stuff like this in subscriptions for the HTTP protocol, right? The GraphQL over HTTP spec is not concerned with WebSockets at the moment, so I haven't looked anything in there. So regarding batching or subscriptions, we haven't looked at that. But kind of the idea is that the protocol we have at the end should work with batching, but also general streaming things like defer, and also with things like subscriptions over HTTP.
And are people generally on board with the idea of variable batching?
Yes, that is something that has a lot of use case for people. I talked to someone, I don't remember who,
I mean, honestly,
they had yeah, go ahead.
I think that this is not only a use case of Gateway. I actually think that variable batching would also be a very valid use case for clients, because why have 2 fields when you can have 1? Like every field is a liability. So technically,
Yeah. And not just that, it could also be used to optimize with streaming in results and not blocking.
Yeah, I think even while like we in the Fusion implementation will also support the legacy request batching that is out there now.
Yeah.
With the request index and the variable index on the new request batching that we defined that is combined with variable batching, you have a much better processing rate because you can already start processing things that are very, very far down in your request batch because you
Yeah.
know, okay, this request index 1, okay, it belongs to this part in my graph. So I think it's a much better way in general to think around batching. So like let's see what people think once the spec text is more updated. At the moment it was just a placeholder what I put on the repository. And I think if there's a bit more meat to it, I hope there's more feedback then on it.
So,
but what are your general thoughts on the batching protocols?
Mine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of combining request batching and variable batching and ideally defer as well in one protocol. So at least for the HTTP implementation, we have a common protocol we can build on to support all these features.
Yeah,
Derek?
plus one to what Martin said. And I think though that's actually we have the topic of the batch lookups allowed when there are no requirements. I'm wondering whether this is something that we would be. This is something that we should be also potentially considering. In there was an interesting case for like the database lookups, right? It's basically stuff for simple stuff could just work, right? It has limitations. Okay, it's a separate topic. Is a third one over there, but I wonder.
Oh, you jumped into that one. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm saying it's as for like the batching overall, right? And ideally, yes. I think the variable batching and request batching is much more flexible. It just solves all those problems there. But the HTTP spec, I think the folks are trying to get it out before the GraphQL conf. So this is not gonna be part of the spec.
No.
Right away, right? So it's gonna be like a proposal to the spec over there, right? Eventually.
Yeah, it's so the idea is to get it into draft version 2 of the spec.
Okay.
And like all the protocols, there are a couple of. Also, the trusted documents will go in version 2. The reason for that is that the GraphQL over HTTP specification as is, in essence, encodes the state of the status that's out there. That was the goal for version 1. The goal for version 2 is then to get in the other protocols that we have, right? So there are a ton of like variable batching, persisted documents. This is all version 2. Because it was first get everyone on one page around the core specification, and that's just query mutations, not even subscriptions. And the rest is coming then in V2.
And it totally makes sense. Well, what I'm saying is that if we're trying to figure out a scope of the Federation spec for the GraphQL conf, right, and have it into some like a draft or whatever stage 1, right? That having that have a dependency on another spec that is not actually going to be released also for a while.
Well, we
It's
don't
I think that's fine.
we
But I
don't
mean,
really have a dependency on it, right? Like, it's just that
it's inefficient, yeah, without it. But yeah, that's fine. True.
it depends. It depends. It also depends when what we talk about. I think there's certain conditions which probably are very inefficient. But talking about the last topic of today, the batch resolver, in case you don't have requirements and so on, we may have to rethink anyway how we approach this in the specification. So essentially that we say that this is how this is going to work. And there are different batching and different, there's different ways of how the transport can optimize this. A, variable batching, B, request batching, C, batch lookups and whatever. And there's some, like all of them have conditions. Like, for example, batch resolvers would work out of the box with any GraphQL server which is spec compliant, but it doesn't support requirements. If you have variable batching, you don't need batch resolvers, and you can have the requirements. So I think we shouldn't probably put the requirement of having having variable batching support in the spec, because it's just that it's more an optimization, right?
Yeah, we could write, I don't know if it's a note or an appendix that we recommend variable batching, which is and that's also what I meant. Like variable batching will be in a draft state. So once version 1 of the HTTP spec is released, and that will be happening before the conference, we then can get the variable batching into a draft state so that we have actually the same state on both specifications. And then we can refer, we can say, okay, you can use the standard request batching that is around there. It's not specified, but Apollo has here defined how it looks like with an array of blah, blah, blah. And technically that works well, but we recommend to use the new variable batching. And then we can, maybe we have...
Or a combination of both, right? Because I
Yeah.
think that's also a use case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Maybe we have...
I think it's also fine for us to push for adoption, to really strongly recommend it and take
Yeah.
this as an opportunity for people to implement the transport.
Yes.
To be honest, I think once we get, I mean, let's finish 6 first and talk quickly about 7 before we go to 8. But depending on what infrastructure you work with, what infrastructure you work on, what services you work with, maybe 8 is completely valid, because it could be that you just have a system where it doesn't support variable batching because it's some auto-generated API from some ERP system or something like this. And then having a batch resolver is godsend, right? Because you can essentially just start integrating these fields into your graph without having to worry about anything, like without making feature requests and so on.
That's definitely a benefit, and I'm open to including that as an option in the spec. But my worry is that it does you run the risk of sort of painting yourself in a corner and not understanding why you can't use requires at a later stage, for instance, or even like our validation would need to take that into account, and people might not really understand why it isn't working.
Yeah, you need to, this must be enforced on the composition, right?
It must be, yeah, but it's sort of if that decision has been made for you and now you're in a situation where you have a need for requires, like it sort of it starts feeling like a restriction of federation, and it may reflect badly on federation. So I do think we want to push people in the direction of variable batching. Yeah.
I mean, we definitely want to. I agree with that.
So maybe we like frame it as a compatibility mode or something.
Yeah, I was also thinking in that direction, because it's kind of like the use case that GraphBase had was basically you have a system that has less functionality or less capabilities. So in this case, we can say, okay, we run you in kind of a compatibility node. We can use you, but you cannot use advanced features.
Yeah, and I think the auto generation use case is probably a good one for that, because you're not manually manipulating the schema. You're probably not using requires.
Yeah, that will be the same thing for the REST endpoints, right? That you want to use for connectors.
Yeah, and there's more. Like it could also be schema governance. Like you could have a rule in your in the company that you don't use requires because it adds complexity. If you have a good way of distributing data through events on your system, then you may not need requires because you can just distribute the data to the place where you need it. Then you don't need requires. And then you have less complexity on the gateway, right? It could be a schema governance for whatever reason.
Could be, but at the same time, folks often work around those issues by sticking stuff to the keys, right? So, which we want to avoid as well. So that's also like
yeah, I mean, that's, by the way, an issue which I recently ran into with a customer. Eventual consistency in federation is hard. It's really, really hard.
I mean, it's always hard.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not a new problem, but it was always there.
And
Like,
now
if the client was calling like independent REST endpoints, they would have to deal with the same situation.
yeah, but they're slow. You know, the problem is that you make a mutation and then everything happens so fast on the back end. You don't have to round trip to the UI, and then eventually it might not be there. But
Yeah.
okay, so if we say we want to get into drafts day 2, that means a lot of work for us left to do. We have, can you scroll up quickly?
Yep.
To the issues. These are on the main repository. I believe we have around 50 issues open. We have a few pull requests open, which we still have to review. One from Glenn that adds the is directives. There's still a bit of formal specification to do, but it's more or less copy paste from what we have in requires. So just didn't have the time to think into it. Then there is still quite a lot to do in the execution chapter with the algorithm there. And probably we also have to polish the satisfiability chapter a bit. And this is before we do like a review of the whole specification. So
Yeah,
what would be really helpful, like, is if we can all, like, we either split the issues or we just go through all of them. Like take 5 issues a day and add a comment onto it, just so that we know if this is still relevant or not, because it could very likely be that a lot of them are not relevant anymore or are still things that we have to do. Then once we get the issue count a bit down, the next thing is that we need to define, I would say, like, when is GraphQL Conf? Since
yeah, we should probably also tag them, Pascal. There are a couple of that we, at least for version 1, could skip. Like we talked about the simplified key definition proposal, for instance, what originally came from Stephen. And I think the sentiment was not for version 1. Maybe we could consider it later. So we could also just tag them.
I think that's fine. And I also think that we could discuss it after like in the next work group. It's just that like everyone has the power to say in which version this feature goes in. It's either in the stage, so in this iteration, or we push it to the next.
Yeah.
And we can have a quick look at it next week. And I think that's something, it's a lot of work to do. It would be great if everyone can take a couple of issues and add a few tags. And then
okay.
Yeah, I mean, because
we can also take 5, prepare them, and put them in the next meeting. Quickly go over them.
Do we have 10 weeks until?
Yeah, well, we take more, but probably a couple of them we can just discuss. Everybody can go through them, but just like it's more.
I think we should let's put 5 to 10 issues on the agenda every week, and then the first thing is to go through them, and then we decide what we do with them.
Yeah, because if you distribute, everybody takes them, then it's at the end there's none.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, let's do it this way. So for next week, we'll just take the oldest 5 or the oldest 10 issues, and then we can go through them quickly together and can decide what we do, because we will anyway, if we need to do something, it will anyway take a week to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing is we need to have for I would say at least 2 or 3 steps, we probably should have kind of soft deadlines for us. Like we could say that we want to finish execution this month, or we want to finish validation this month, or whatever, because it's not long until there is GraphQL Conf. And if we really want to go into draft 2, then we need to have these chapters ready. So
yeah, from the structure, maybe let's have one and then move on to the next topic. From the structure, like we have at the moment here overview that describes the general characteristics. What is missing there, and I have that on my to-do list, is like the general terms, entities, and value types are not explained, and they are missing. Like what is, we talk about entities, but what is an entity, and what means it to us? Like kind of an overview topic. We have source schemas, composition, executor. This probably goes. Yeah, this is just placeholder. Share types goes Pascal.
what?
Share types, this chapter here goes, or we kick it out. It was just a dump.
Yeah. Did I add this one?
No, I think this is just when we initially structured it, we just needed a place to put the scalars.
Right.
But we can actually put the scalars also here
Yeah,
to the schema.
that's fine.
And then Appendix 1A is specification, and then another Appendix B for batching, where we describe how we interface with batching. What do you guys think?
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, for the structure is changed quite quickly. I don't worry about the structure. I actually worry about the context content that we have in validation, and in I think source schema is already pretty far. Schema composition is already pretty far. We are still a bit in the we still don't really know what to do with satisfiability. I mean, I think satisfiability is in a better state than execution. But I think we should first tackle execution so that we at least have this in a better state. We need to think about it again. I also lost it a bit.
Yeah, okay. So if you hear some background noises, some high, that's my girls are having a bath. Well, sorry. Okay. Then let's move on to the next topic. So just as a takeaway, we will prepare some work action items for next week, and then we can go over them quickly, work them through at the beginning of the meeting, get them out of the way, and we reiterate that over the next couple of meetings to get further in the spec text. Okay. So let's go to the next topic, and that is really one I think we need to. If we could get that, it would be so good. So let me just open the PR because I had that in the composite schema.
It was quite funny. We talked about it last week about how we how the gateway knows about the features of subgraphs, and then in the main work group, Benji in the last 10 minutes just introduced a new a concept which solves all our problems. So it's quite nice.
This thing here, the service capabilities, like we are thinking about that in the core spec in the context of nullability. And the way basically for smart kinds to disable error propagation or null propagation. But it introduces things that I think we could use for the composite schema spec to signal capabilities in the schema, like batching or whatever, can be transport, whatnot. So the idea is that the introspection system is extended with the new service type _ service. So it won't collide with Apollo's _ service type. And it has an array of capabilities on it. So a capability at the moment is just a string. So there are discussions to that this could also be something like any in the future, but to preserve option value at the moment, we think about to leave that as the value as string, and then you have an identifier. And the value could also be null if you just want to signal you have something. So Benji outlined there that this also will translate into the schema. So just let me quickly do a new window. So when you have the schema here, we actually have schema. This is the typical GraphQL, not Groovy, GraphQL, where we have the types, right? Where you have this query, then this query. And this is where at the moment everybody stores settings, right? With directive on the schema in the SDL. And this new service thing is the same like the schema thing, but means this is in the context of the service, the GraphQL server. So it doesn't actually have to do with a schema structure, but conveys capabilities. Like, for instance, what the error behavior is, like in this case, it's propagate or things like that. It also could convey like what kind of protocols you support, like variable batching and other things. What are thoughts on this?
I mean, I like the idea of finally getting something in the spec, because we've been stuck for a long time trying to get sort of basically a mapping between directives and metadata in there somehow. And that's a hugely complicated topic, because directives are used in many different ways at many different stages of like from schema construction to true metadata. And the types you're encoding there can get pretty complex with input objects, etc. So perhaps getting something much simpler in there, like just relying on a simple name value mapping and leaving it up to the owner of a namespace basically to put in that string value, sort of whatever they need, might actually turn out to be the right solution. It doesn't give us everything we need, I think. One topic I'd be interested in exploring further is sort of the distinction between sort of what belongs to the schema and what belongs to the service, and whether that distinction makes sense in some, like I'm thinking of cases like we use directives for federation versioning, for instance. Well, that's a schema issue, so I don't think that would be a replacement for like would you consider that a server capability, for instance, with a new spec?
Well, I'm wondering because you could argue that you could have something like under capabilities saying, GraphQL Federation spec version 1, and then Apollo Federation version 2, whatever, or something, right?
Well,
you could still qualify them over there saying, yeah, this is compatible with the GraphQL Federation spec and Apollo Federation extra capabilities. But yeah, it's schema tells you a lot of this stuff. It's like, I don't know.
And for
Yes.
things like Federation spec, I would think that wouldn't concern the client, and the service capabilities are really communicating to clients, right, about the what contract is
well,
there.
I mean, they also apply to subgraphs, so they're useful from the gateway to the subgraph.
Yeah. The beauty of the beauty of this is if we have service capabilities there, like in the composition, we know what the server can do, so we can use this knowledge to do certain decisions already at build time.
Yeah, I mean, we could argue that everything which is schema related, like what version of Apollo Federation you use, could also be a service capability. Like the schema is part of the service, so it depends on where you flag it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my main question, sort of based on what sort of how Michael presented it as sort of there being a distinction between the schema and the service, and if there is, I think we need to clarify sort of what belongs on which side, and maybe that distinction doesn't hold at all.
There is because like this, if you take this schema file and you leave that out, if you take this schema information and you put it in another GraphQL server, it will work. You have the same schema capabilities, but you could have hugely different service capabilities. Like maybe your service doesn't support this protocol. So the service capabilities are meant to also reflect the engine capabilities of your transport, of the engine itself, and things like that. Whereas the schema capabilities, like that there is a defer directive. This is what we should still inspect through inspecting the schema itself.
But what about things like federation versioning, where there are typically repercussions for the schema as well? It's not just the service.
It's a good. Yes, but I think this goes also into this, right? Because like a schema might support different stream, but what increment of that protocol does it support? You cannot see that from the types. And I think we discussed that, like for instance here, where you now have the capability to tell the server capability of what kind of protocol version you have of the different stream specification.
I think for federation, like it affects composition typically, like the version. Are we okay sort of calling that a service capability? Or
what
like
would you call it, a schema capability?
I mean that's how we currently refer to it. Like it affects how the directives we use for federation are interpreted.
It depends a bit on what you consider the root now, right? Like, do you consider the root of the subgraph the schema, or is the root going to be the service? Because, you know, that then the root, so to say, like the service, what's defined in the service capability would affect the schema, which then kind of would make sense again, right?
Well, but there's still a distinction. Like if we like we have certain directives that are either like not available in certain versions or are interpreted differently based on the federation version that you sort of signify your schema supports. We've needed that to evolve the spec. So I think we will continue to need a mechanism like that for the graphical federation spec.
Yeah. And there is a difference, right? There is, and the difference or Benji made here also is there is the service kind of things, and there's the type system sort of things. And maybe we need also capabilities on the type system.
Maybe, yeah.
Because like you want to interpret the differences in.
I mean, as long as we're introducing this, it's a very simple like name value mechanism. If we can apply that both to the service level and the schema level at the same time, I mean that makes sense to me.
Yeah, to me it's like very vague of what is actually a schema versus a service capability,
Right.
like distinction there, because well, like Michael, you mentioned the example of defer, right? But per the spec, right, we can exclude the default built-in directives, and defer is kind of special in that sense, right? But technically, if we don't define defer in the schema, and one server says I support it and the other one does not in SDL, that's, to me, it's like, sounds like it should be under service capabilities, right? Because the argument is I can take this schema and it's going to run here and here. One is going to ignore defer, the other one is going to actually use it, right? But it's I don't know, it's a very influx of what those
Yeah,
features.
maybe it's also not such a problem, because like why it's here in service is so that we can do protocol things. And if it's on a schema, it doesn't make sense to have, like, the type system has nothing to do with how HTTP is executed.
Maybe we also have to add a bit more context about the state of this feature. So for client control nullability, this is something that we most likely need in the main working group. So that's going to be pushed quite quickly, quite far.
And actually, Pascal, why you say that, this is also kind of type system, like core schema effect, right? If you don't propagate errors, like the same type system works really different from the consumer perspective.
Yeah. So these are discussions that we should probably have. We should probably have on the main working group. But the main thing I want to go at is that we don't have this schema node, this service node. We will not have it because it's first only an introspection feature. So whatever is going to happen in this spec pull request,
that is not set. I talked to Benji about this. We might get this through, right? So we're gonna see.
Well, yeah, I guess it's from the main work group will decide in which direction this will go, and then we can see if we can reuse it or if we have to introduce our own directives.
Yeah, so the feedback. So Benji wants feedback on that. That's why I even put it on the agenda, because if we say this works perfect, and we can work with this in general, then this is a good feedback and a good indication that what they are thinking about is good and makes it more probable for this to get merged. And I think the smaller we keep, the smaller this feature is, the more likely it's to be merged.
Yeah.
And if we start wanting here complex objects or whatever, it's will block it.
No, I agree with the simplicity. Like the only thing I was worried about is the distinction between service and schema, but maybe that's also a distinction that complicates matters and isn't needed in practice. As long as we can like introspect a running service and use that information to affect composition, I think that's all we need. Like in practice, the distinction between schema and service may not matter as much. Like I understand there's a theoretical distinction, but from a client perspective, what you care about is whoever is offering that service right now.
Yeah, and I think even on top of that, if we start a distinction on this, maybe this overcomplicates it also.
Yeah, because then you have to decide each time whether it's a service or a schema capability, and you get discussions back and forth. And
additionally, if you host two graphical schemas on your service, one can have different capabilities than the other schema.
Well, but then there are two different services, maybe. Like a service in the graphical spec is tied to a schema, I think.
Yeah, but that's the question, right? Like is if we already have a root, the root of all things, which is the schema, Do we need another route?
Well, that's a good question, actually. Do we need the service route here? Couldn't we just have top-level capabilities?
I mean, we can, yeah, like I think the reason for that, but we can put this feedback back, right? We
I
can,
mean, yeah. What was the reason for
the reason I think was that this capabilities captures more than type system related things. Like it's not like if you put it on schema,
No, I don't mean put it on schema. I mean put it as a
just
separate route.
capabilities.
Yeah, just capabilities as a root field next to schema.
Yes.
I don't know if that really like
I think
in practice.
I think the reason why there is a route, a service, and then a capabilities is that usually when these things go through and are rolled out, it takes around 2 weeks for someone to come up with something else that they want to have on the service level. And now
It's
now
yeah.
you have a place to put it if it's a good idea without having to introduce another route for something else. So if we really need to group this under a service, like if we really want to have this capability node and we don't want to put it into schema, I think the service makes sense because that makes it a bit more extendable. The argument I don't think that Derek made is very valid, and that's also something that we have to discuss in the main working group. Like, why is there a distinction? Does it make sense? Is the reasoning well enough? So that's a bit the question here. It's just that at the moment, that's also what we discussed in the work group. At the moment, it's an introspection feature, which doesn't help us. But this will go very quickly into the specification because we want to move nullability ahead, and therefore we will quickly in the next couple of months, I believe, probably know in which direction this goes, and then we can assume what it is. Like we could even have in our draft already talk about service capabilities. Then we would just have a dependency on service.
Yes, but we should push that the SDL version is immediately there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. Let's move to the last topic. We have 8 minutes. And that is not this one. That is batching lookups. So we already talked a bit about that. But it is the feeling, do we want to have that in version 1? I mean, it's not a lot more work, I think. It's more like that we have to add new sections under lookups. There must be composition changes naturally. Because like when you have batch lookups, and I would be very strict on it. If you have these batch lookups, the whole subgraph cannot have requirements.
Should that be even more that if you have a batch lookups, then you cannot use it at all in the super graph at all? Or like
That's
a
too much.
all? Or that's too much?
Yeah, because like the idea is you have this one thing like a connector in Apollo, right? And you have this REST API, you have this batch lookup on top of that sitting, and just because you want to use this one piece from this external thing, now your whole subgraph doesn't compose with any requirements anymore. Then it's kind of you basically painted yourself in a corner and cannot get out of it anymore.
Yep, I agree. I think it should be on a subgraph level. Exactly because of this reasoning. Like if you want to integrate your REST API into your supergraph where you already have requirements, it wouldn't work. So
Yeah.
Do you guys?
I
Yeah,
agree with that. I'm just wondering if there's any evolution, like whether you can like what would it take to move a subgraph from this restricted mode to a mode where you can use requires?
remove remove the
Or-
batch lookups
Remove all
Well-
the batch lookups, yeah.
and use variable batching.
it could be a capability that you
How
want
do
to
you?
that you want to enable the batch lookups. By default, it would just not detect them as lookups.
How do you do that with connectors? Do they support requirements?
No, they don't at the moment.
So you have the same
And they're not
restriction.
strictly like strictly taken. They wouldn't need to be um, like they wouldn't need to use the subgraph entry points. Like they're not then they're like they obviously they're part of composition, so they sort of act like subgraphs, but they um they don't have to. Um,
Okay. So it's similar to what GraphBase said, that they want to model it as GraphQL kind of, but it's like a subset of the
well, yeah, or a superset in like especially in like in the future when you think about these types of systems, like they're somewhat outside the spec, right? Um,
yeah.
like they so
Yes. So yeah.
they could have their own mechanism for
Yeah.
getting information from the context, and that can like enter the
Yeah.
system in any way you want. It doesn't have to be part of
Yeah.
what you specify here.
Okay. Okay, but then I'm gonna just add this section that you can do that, and this is the restriction. Like if you want to get into the you want to have it all, then you have to use variable batching or request batching or transport level batching, I say.
But we need to be very explicit about this. So maybe like call it restricted mode and really like, but then that means we would have to refer to that throughout the spec to
Yeah.
indicate those restrictions.
Okay. I think
I would say, I would also
restricted or
say,
compatibility.
I
I would
like
say that
restricted because it's not strictly taken like just about compatibility, right?
Mhm.
Compatibility sounds like that you eventually can upgrade and fix it.
Yeah.
You will not be. We can also call it the non-require mode. It's just that when we have in the future another another feature, then it's gonna collide. But restricted sounds good for me.
Yeah. Derek?
yeah, I was gonna say is that should be just automatic, or we also should require that service capability saying the mode is restricted as an explicit also mention. That is kind of like signals the intent that yes, I know. I'm gonna
Yeah,
be
because it's such a big decision. Like it might be a surprise that like if you add a batch lookup to your schema, you're suddenly not able to use requires on any part of that subgraph. Um,
Okay. Uh,
so maybe it should
then
be opt-in.
yeah. So we need, if we don't have sales capabilities, we need a directive to kind of
Could be a schema directive
yeah,
then. Yeah.
state the mode. Basically, by default, we have the full capabilities, but you can opt out and say this restricted mode, and then it
Yeah.
just then it has more lookup capabilities, kind of this batch lookup, but it restricts features which requires.
Yeah, and there are details about sort of how you would use batch lookups as well. Like, do we want to limit it even further to like a simple scalar, or do we want to support input objects
I
or
would
multiple arguments? Like, especially multiple arguments can get tricky because you have to basically have two arrays that you have to keep in sync, right?
but that should be okay.
I mean, it can be okay, but it's something that you would have to specify and that you would again need to like
We
check.
we we anyway have to
To be honest,
specify because like
I mean, seriously, like the list, like the batch lookup thing really is to have a batch lookup by in 99% of the cases by an ID, right?
Yeah, so that's why I'm thinking it's much easier to like really make the mode restrictive and just say a batch lookup can only use a single scalar value as its input.
Just think about what would
but there is a problem with that, and this is because like what is the response type? You don't want to have the same array size than the array size you give in, right? You anyway need to read the keys
Well, I mean
from
that's a
the
question because it affects performance as well.
yeah.
well, watch out, Michael. watch out. Technically, in the current specification, you don't have to re-expose the keys from your subgraph.
Yes, but that is because you have a one-to-one.
Yeah. No, and I'm just saying, like it would be a different requirement that we have then. Like batch lookups would only work if the key.
Yes, but we need to describe that, and we need to be very clear on because that's something I got out of the discussion with GraphBase. Their view on how these things work was very driven by the implementation details, and that's why we have to be very clear on how a batch lookup works. And I'm not saying that we have to support this or that, but we need to be very clear. So
Yeah. And think about the implications.
Yeah.
Like needing to expose keys, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think the simplest solution is like simple scalar value, and the output array has to match the input array.
Yeah, that would be the simplest solution. Then you have to
But
return
that
null
does-
bills.
But that doesn't work. That doesn't work because think about it. When you, especially like we talk in the when you talk about batch lookups, we also talk about REST APIs. And if you pass in the ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the REST API will return you what it finds, not what you provided. Like it would be a very, very strict response shape that you would have to require from a REST API to actually work with.
Yeah.
Whereas,
how does the current node interface do that? Because there's a nodes root field
Nodes,
as well, right?
nodes. I would
exposes the key.
yeah, it exposes ID again, so
Okay.
it doesn't need to return nulls to you.
Okay. I mean, we could make that a requirement.
think
but
that
then
would-
but then like needing to expose the ID.
Yeah.
And especially if we restrict it to a simple scalar value, that might actually work.
Yeah.
Honestly, I believe that would be the
But-
most likely the most stable and simplest solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can draft that up. I mean, it's also from the spec text. It's a lot less to write.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's basically, okay, this is the restricted mode. This is how batch lookups have to look like. And then we just explain that it's a single ID, doesn't have the full is capabilities around it. And then it should work, I think.
We're over time, but just
Yeah. Yeah, I draft something up and then let's talk about it next week.
Yeah.
So before we adjourn, I got a question. So
Yeah.
saying that you can specify multiple IDs, but you only get one response from this restricted mode. That seems kind of that's how some of those APIs work. But would that also imply that whenever you do variable batching or the request batching, you can also return like only sparsely populated responses? Because the argument is like, yeah, you're returning ID from those, right? And
Well,
that's why
there you can rely on the request index.
Yeah.
Because in variable batching, it's technically a whole graphical execution that runs for all of the requests, the provided values. So when you have when you fetch with variable batching ID 1, 2, and 3 of product by ID, and product by ID is non nullable, data will be nulled in the case where you don't find an ID.
Yeah, so the idea with this is we have this. Yeah. Like each response here, we have a variable index and a request index. And so when we issue our request in the beginning, we need to remember which key maps to which request index or which variable index. And then we can, without parsing the results, very quickly just arrange the results back to the right key that we requested to. I think we have. Do we have an? Yeah. So basically, the response would contain a variable index if it's just variable batching, data, errors, and extensions.
Okay.
So you don't need, and even if you use the request batching that Apollo defined with the array, the expectation there is that the array is ordered in the same order as the requests. So this should also work.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Good meet.
Then see you guys
See you
next week.
Next week. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.